My daughter-in-law handed me an envelope at my own kitchen table and told me to sign what was inside before my son got home. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. There was a particular kind of confidence in how she set it down. Flat, precise, like she was filing paperwork at an office where she already knew the outcome. "It's cleaner this way," she said, "for everyone." I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at her. Then I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. "I'll read it first," I said. Her mouth tightened just slightly. "It's straightforward. Most things that need to be signed aren't." She sat down across from me then, which I hadn't expected. I thought she'd pace. Instead, she folded her hands on the table like a woman who had rehearsed this moment several times and decided sitting was the right posture for it. Inside the envelope was a property transfer document, specifically the deed to the house my late wife and I had built in 1987, the one where my son grew up, the one I still lived in. The document had already been partially filled out. Her name was in the receiving field. Mine was the only signature missing. I set it down on the table and smoothed the edge with my thumb. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly prepared for, was that I had already spoken to my attorney that morning. Not about this document, about a different one. One that made this envelope, and everything she thought it contained, completely irrelevant. I didn't say that. Not yet. I just looked at her and said, "Let me think on it." She left 40 minutes later. She thought she'd given me something to consider. She had no idea I'd already been considering it for 6 months. My wife passed 3 years ago. Lung cancer, though she never smoked a day in her life. The kind of thing that makes you stop believing in fairness for a while. We'd been married 41 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, kept a garden in the back that bloomed into something ridiculous every June, and could tell when you were lying just by the way you held your shoulders. I missed her every single day. Still do. After she passed, my son moved back to town. He'd been living out west for about 8 years. Decent job, different life, and then he met his wife. They'd only been married 2 years when they came back. He told me he wanted to be closer, that it felt right. That family mattered. I believed him. I still believe he meant it, at least partially. What I didn't know then was how much of that decision had been shaped by conversations I wasn't part of. She was pleasant enough at first, organized. She had opinions about how rooms should look and which contractors were reliable and what kind of investment made sense for a man my age. She framed everything as helpfulness. And I was lonely enough and tired enough and still raw enough from losing my wife that I let a lot of things go that I should have questioned. The first thing I noticed was how she managed information. Not lies exactly. Omissions. She'd mention things after they'd already been decided. My son would reference a conversation we'd apparently had that I didn't remember the same way. Small things. The kind you explain away once, twice, and then start to wonder about on the third time. Then her brother arrived. He was staying with them, she said, temporarily. He'd had some financial trouble, vague, unspecified. The kind of trouble that seems to require other people's addresses and other people's mail. He was polite when he had to be and invisible the rest of the time. But I started noticing his car in my driveway at odd hours, and once, coming in from the back garden, I heard him on the phone in my kitchen talking about square footage and what the market was doing in this neighborhood. I didn't say anything. I went back outside and stood in the garden for a while and thought about what my wife would have done. She would have paid attention, she would have said. That's all. Just pay attention. So I did. I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic, just a small pad on my nightstand. Dates, observations, things that didn't quite add up. The way a logbook works. Not because I was suspicious yet exactly, but because I was old enough to know that things you notice and don't record have a way of becoming things you can't prove. My attorney was an old friend. Not a fancy firm, just a man I'd known since before my son was born, the kind of lawyer who wore the same style of suit every decade and never sent a bill without calling first. I called him one Tuesday morning in September and said I wanted to talk through my estate documents. He said, "Come by Thursday." I didn't mention my daughter-in-law. I didn't mention her brother. I just said I wanted to make sure everything was current and properly structured. He nodded through most of it and then said, "With the particular care of a man who has known you a long time, is there something specific you're concerned about?" "Not yet," I said, "but I want to be ready in case there is." We spent 3 hours going through everything. The house, the accounts, the small piece of commercial property I still owned on the edge of town that nobody in my family seemed to think about much. By the time we were done, my attorney had drafted a revised trust document, an updated power of attorney naming my nephew instead of my son, and a clear record of asset ownership that left nothing ambiguous. I signed it all that afternoon, with my full name, witnessed properly, filed the same week. I didn't tell my son. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was trying to protect both of us until I understood what was happening. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like one. 3 weeks later, My daughter-in-law sat across from me at my own kitchen table with that envelope. After she left, I didn't call my attorney right away. I sat in the kitchen for a while and drank the rest of my coffee, which had gone cold. Outside, the garden needed attention. My wife had planted a row of hydrangeas along the back fence in the early 90s that still came back every year, stubborn and blue, and I'd let the weeds get ahead of them this past month. I pulled on my boots and went out and worked for about an hour. Hands in the dirt, back complaining in that way it does now that I'm past 65, and I felt something settle. Then I went inside and called my attorney. "She came by," I said when he answered. A brief pause. "With?" "A deed transfer, already filled out. My signature was the only thing missing." He exhaled slowly, not surprised, just confirming a shape he'd already suspected. "Same house?" "Yes." "Did you sign?" "No good." He didn't elaborate on that yet. "What's your son's involvement?" That was the question I'd been sitting with since she left, because I genuinely didn't know. My son was a good man, I believed that, but he was also a man who had spent years deferring to her on the things she called practical, finances, planning, the logistics of what he called adult life. She was efficient and certain in a way that he'd always found reassuring. I understood it. I'd watched it happen gradually, the way you watch a tide shift. "I don't know," I said honestly. "He may not know what she brought me." "That matters," my attorney said. "Find out, carefully." I called my son that evening. Not to confront, just to talk. We had dinner together 2 nights a week, usually. I kept it to the ordinary things. How he was sleeping. Whether his knee was still bothering him from the old injury. Whether he'd had a chance to look at that leak in the gutters on the north side of the house. Midway through the conversation, he said, "She mentioned she stopped by to see you today." "She did," I said. A pause. "Everything okay?" "We had coffee," I said. "She seems well." He relaxed into talking about something else, and I let him. But in that pause, in the fraction of a second before he asked if everything was okay, I heard something. Not guilt. Something more like uncertainty, like a man checking whether a story he'd been told lined up with one he was hearing. I made a note when we hung up. The next morning, my attorney called me back. He'd done some checking, the kind of quiet inquiry that doesn't alert anyone. The property transfer document had been drafted by a firm I didn't recognize in a town 40 miles away. The notary listed was her brother. He wasn't licensed in this state. That word landed in my chest the same way it always does when something confirms what you felt but couldn't name. "What does that mean?" I asked, though I already had a general idea. "It means the document isn't valid as prepared," he said, "but it also means someone went to effort to make it look like it was." I thought about her hands folded on my kitchen table, the practiced stillness of someone who has rehearsed. "I want to understand the full picture," I said. "Before I do anything," agreed, he said. "Let her keep moving." She called the next afternoon. Warm tone, lighter than before, as if the previous visit had been a misunderstanding between friends rather than an attempt to get me to sign away my home. "I just want to make sure we're on the same page," she said. What page is that?" I asked. "About the house. About planning. You know, practical things." She paused. "You're not getting any younger, and we just want to make sure everything is protected." Protected. Interesting word. Protected from what? I asked. A brief hesitation. "From things getting complicated later. Can you be more specific?" Her voice shifted, not dramatically, just a degree. The warmth becoming something more careful. "We're just thinking about the future." "So am I said. We said goodbye. I stood at my kitchen window and looked out at the hydrangeas for a moment, and then I called my nephew. He was the only one I fully trusted at that point, which I didn't say to him directly. I just said I wanted to update him on some things, and that I'd appreciate his discretion. He was a quiet man, mid-40s, an accountant by trade, and he had the particular gift of listening without filling the silence with reassurance. I told him what had happened. All of it. The envelope, the brother, the document drafted in another town, the unlicensed notary, the way information had been managed over the past year. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you want me to come down?" "Not yet," I said, "but soon. Tell me what you need." What I needed was simple, for someone trustworthy to know the full picture, so that if anything shifted quickly, there was a person who could act. He understood without my saying it plainly. That evening, my son came by himself. No call ahead, which was unusual. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same chair she'd sat in, and looked at me with the expression of a man who has been trying to work something out and hasn't quite gotten there. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Go ahead. Did she show you a document?" "She did," I said. He rubbed his face. He looked tired. Not guilty. Tired, which is different. The tiredness of a man who has been told a version of events and is starting to feel its edges. "She told me you'd already discussed it, that it was something you'd brought up." I looked at him steadily. I hadn't. The silence between us was long and careful. I didn't fill it. He sat with it. "I didn't know," he finally said. "I know," I said, because I believed it. "I should have asked you, directly." Yes, I said, not cruelly, just clearly. He put his hands on the table and looked at them. Is there something I don't know about? With the house, or… The house is fine, I said. Everything is protected. I made sure of that before any of this happened. He looked up. Something shifted in his face. Relief, and under it, something more complicated. The quiet realization of what my preparation implied about what I'd suspected and when. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about that for a moment. Because I wasn't sure what you knew, and because I wanted to be certain before I said something I couldn't take back. He nodded slowly. That at least he understood. He'd inherited a certain kind of carefulness from his mother. We sat there for a while without talking, and it wasn't uncomfortable, exactly. It was the particular quiet of two people who've always been on the same side trying to remember how to say so. My attorney filed a formal notice 2 days later. Not aggressive, simply a documented statement of the current ownership structure, the trust arrangement, and a formal request for the return of the property transfer document. He included a note about the unlicensed notary, the out-of-state firm, and the discrepancy in how the visit had been characterized to my son versus what actually occurred. She didn't respond directly. Her brother left. Quietly, without announcement, his car gone one morning before anyone was up. A week later, she asked to speak with me. My son was there this time. We sat at the kitchen table, all three of us, and she was different. Not warm, not strategic, just careful. The kind of careful that comes when someone realizes the ground they thought was solid isn't. I think there was a misunderstanding, she said. I didn't agree or disagree. I waited. I only wanted to help plan things, she said. I wasn't trying to, she stopped, started again. I thought I was being practical. Practical for whom, I asked. She didn't answer that. My son said quietly, I think we all need to start over with better communication. I looked at him. He was trying. I respected that. I'm open to it, I said. She nodded, and I noticed she didn't make eye contact when she did. After they left, I went back to the garden. The hydrangeas were doing what they always did. Surviving without being asked, coming back in the right season, blue and a little stubborn. My wife had picked that variety specifically. She'd said she liked things that didn't need to be convinced. My attorney called the following morning with a final confirmation. The document had been formally withdrawn. The trust stood. The house remained as it had always been, mine, held in a structure that required no one's signature but my own for any future decisions. You handled that well, he said. I had help, I said. Some of it from you, most of it from paying attention. Physical therapy for my lower back had started that month. Nothing dramatic, just the ordinary maintenance of a body that's been used for 67 years. The therapist was a young woman who didn't talk much but noticed everything. During one session, she said unprompted, "You seem like someone who doesn't panic easily." I used to, I said. Less now. What changed? I thought about it. I stopped trying to control how things looked and started focusing on what they were. She nodded and told me to hold the position for another 10 seconds. My son and I had dinner that Thursday, as usual. We didn't talk directly about what had happened. We talked about the gutters and whether the old maple in the back was going to need to come down, and a book I'd been reading. He was quieter than usual, and I let him be. At the end of the evening, standing at the door, he said, "I'm sorry I didn't ask you directly." "You're here now," I said. He nodded. He still looked tired, but he also looked like a man who'd made a decision about something, even if he hadn't said it aloud yet. I didn't press. I'd learned that some realizations need to finish arriving on their own schedule. That night, I made myself tea and sat in the chair by the window where my wife used to read. The neighborhood was quiet. The street had that particular stillness it gets in the fall when the air shifts and everything slows down just slightly, as if making room for something. My phone buzzed once. A message from my daughter-in-law. 3 sentences. She said she was sorry. She said she'd let someone else's thinking guide her in a direction she shouldn't have gone. She said she hoped, in time, things could be different. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down on the table and didn't respond that night. Not because the words meant nothing, because some things deserve time before they deserve an answer. I had learned that too, eventually. That the space between receiving something and responding to it wasn't weakness or avoidance, it was its own kind of strength. The kind you develop slowly, over decades, usually by watching someone you loved practice it first. My wife had been a patient woman. I was still learning what that meant. 3 days later, I wrote back. 2 sentences. I said I appreciated her saying so, and that I was willing to move forward if she was. That was enough. Maybe more than enough. Doors don't have to be flung open to be unlocked. The following Thursday, my nephew drove down. We walked the property together, the house, the garden, the small outbuilding in the back, where I still kept my tools. He didn't say much, just walked beside me in the easy way of someone who doesn't need conversation to be present. At the back fence, where the hydrangeas were finally starting to go dormant for the season, he said she would have handled it the same way. He meant my wife. Maybe, I said. She was better at it than me. You did all right, he said. The afternoon light was the particular gold of late October, low and long, the kind that makes everything look like it's being remembered. I stood there for a moment and let it land. I was 67 years old. I had outlasted one attempt to take something that wasn't anyone else's to take. I had not shouted. I had not panicked. I had paid attention, kept records, trusted the right people, and let the system do what systems do when you give them what they need. I hadn't won anything, exactly. Winning implies someone else lost, and I didn't think of it that way. I had simply stayed in my own house, on my own terms, with my name on the right documents, the way it had always been, the way it would continue to be. I went inside and made dinner and ate it at the table where my wife and I had eaten 1,000 meals. The house was quiet in the way houses get when they've held enough life to know how to hold silence, too. I thought about the envelope, about the practiced stillness at my kitchen table, about the word practical, and all the different shapes it could take depending on who was using it and why. Then I thought about paying attention, about the small pad on my nightstand, about Thursday mornings with my attorney, about my nephew walking the fence line without needing to be asked. None of it was dramatic. None of it made good television. But it was real, and it was mine, and it had held. Some things don't need to be shouted to be true. They just need to be documented, and patient, and sure of themselves in the quiet way that lasts. That's what I was still learning to be. What I was getting better at, year by year, in the particular way of a man with enough time behind him to finally stop rushing the things that matter.